Good morning, good morning, good morning. Shalom, shalom, Sister Sonia. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Good morning to you all. Good afternoon for us.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure
What
to talk to you.
What time is Israel right now?
How is Israel right now? Is the amount of infected with coronavirus is actually increasing.
Wow.
Even though we've been locked up for a week now.
Wow.
And we have had 9,000 yesterday.
Yesterday?
More than 9,000 people getting infected. On the other hand, we have that 1.8 million people got vaccinated already here in Israel. And we are hoping as a country that we're going to be able to open up by March.
Okay.
That we believe that everybody can get vaccinated, and therefore the country will open up in March again. So God willing,
wow,
it will be okay. Yeah.
Today I don't want to take your time because I know you have many material to show.
Yes, yes.
I want to give you time.
Thank you very much, Pastor. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the wars of Israel and the miracles that actually, some of the miracles we can, because we cannot put all the miracles that happened, there are too many.
Wow.
But I'm going to give you some of them, the most famous ones. And all of this is recorded in the book of histories, recorded in documentaries, recorded everywhere. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing what God has done and what he has done in the past and what he's going to do with this country.
Yes.
And you know, another thing is this, that if God, because of all the wars that we have had in Israel, if God did not want the Jewish people to be in this country, we would not be in this country.
Yeah.
Because we had one war after another. We already had 8 wars with the Arab nations. And we're only going to talk about 3 of them, okay? But nevertheless,
and the whole history from 1948 to today, Israel have 8 wars.
8 wars,
wow.
Yes. And many revolutions, like many, how can I say, civil wars.
Yes.
And we had uprisings, Muslim uprisings as well. 2 big ones in 1920 to 1921 and another one between 1936. And that's not counting the uprisings.
Yes.
I'm just saying wars that we had with the Arab nations that surround us. And the fact that Israel is here is a miracle in itself. If it wasn't that God wanted us here, we wouldn't be here. And I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you with the study today.
Yes.
Okay? And it's called The Wars and Its Miracles. Of course, all that I'm going to talk about is in my book, Contested Ownership of Israel, that is on Amazon.
Yes.
So you can go and have a look. Okay, so I'm going to do a recap, a little bit of what we've done in previous lessons, and then I'm going to talk about the new material later on, but just a recap so that you know where you are. And all that you see in green was actually once upon a time the Ottoman Empire that had most of the Mediterranean and the Middle East for about 400 years. The Ottoman Empire collapses in 1916, and in 1917, the League of Nations give this land to the British they part the Ottoman Empire like a cake, and they give part of the Ottoman Empire to the British Mandate. The British were assigned to prepare to do two things by the League of Nations in 1917. One, to prepare the locals for their own self-rule. That's number one. And two, to prepare a home for the Jewish people, a national home for the Jewish people. What happened was that the Muslims that lived in then Palestine did not want the Jews to be in control of any of the land. They wanted all of this Palestine for themselves, okay? Now, that was the problem. This is where the Arab-Israeli conflict actually starts. And what happened, 1922, the British actually gave a big chunk of this land to the Muslims, to Arab Muslim Palestinians, yeah? A big chunk, which is actually 3 times what was this land, and only 1/4 of that land was given to 1/3 of that land was given for the Jews, yeah, the Jewish Palestine. There was going to be an Arab Palestine and a Jewish Palestine, but the Arab Muslims that were inside the Jewish Palestine did not want the Jews to be in control of the land. They wanted to be in control of the land. And they consider shameful that the Jews were actually, that this land was assigned to the Jews. You should know that the Palestinians in the history of humanity, the Palestinians never ruled this land. Yeah. Ever in the history of humanity. And look at this. The Palestinians are saying that we have stolen the land, when in fact it never belonged to them. And therefore you cannot steal a land that doesn't belong to you in the first place. Okay, so there is the first lie. And this land, the Jewish Palestine, was assigned to the Jews. It needed to be for the Jews, okay? But the Palestinians did not want that to happen. So what happens in 1947? The United Nations decide, you see, we had the Holocaust in 1945. The Jewish people were in a serious disarray with refugees in Europe and all kinds of problems. The United Nations decided of the partition of the land in 1947. The Jewish people said yes. They declared the independence on the 14th of May, 1948. What do the Palestinians say? No. They said, all this land belongs to us. It got nothing to do with the Jews, which is incredible because it never belonged to them in the first place. But nevertheless, they wanted the Jews out of here, and they did not accept the partition of the land of 1947. If they would have accepted the partition of the land in 1947, they would have had their land already. They would have had the state already. But this is the first time that they said no. Yeah, they said, we don't want this land to be in the hands of the Jews. It belongs to us. They say the Muslims have controlled this land for hundreds of years. It shouldn't be in the hands of the Jews. Okay, so they rejected it, and a civil war started already in 1947 between the Jews and the Palestinians. The British, who were in control of this land, they said enough is enough in 1947. If they want to kill each other, let them kill each other. We're out of here. Okay? And then 1947, civil war breaks out, and 1948, 14th of May, 1948, we declare our independence in Israel, and the very next day, 5 Arab nations attack Israel all at the same time from all directions. So you can imagine the disaster that this civil war and war actually later on was for Israel. We have the Lebanese attacking us from the north. We have the Syrian attacking us from the Golan Heights and enter into Israel. We have the Jordanians attacking us from the side, and the Egyptians attacking us from down below. What they wanted to do, to kick the Jews into the sea. We were 1 day old. We didn't have army, we didn't have armaments, we didn't have anything, and yet we managed to push those 5 nations outside of the country. And I already talked about this last week, but I just wanted to just a background information, okay? So we pushed these nations out of there, and it was a miracle. It's a miracle because, you know, we didn't have armaments. We didn't have, we stole 2 tanks from the British. We didn't have anything, and yet we won the war. You know, there was in the army, the American army actually came to Israel, came to the Hall of Independence here in Israel, and they were given a tour. These are the Marines in the United States, okay? So they came to Israel, they were given a tour inside the Hall of Independence, and the lecturer said to these Marines, said, you study all the wars and tactics, yeah, you study all this. Why don't you study the Jewish wars? Why don't you study the Israeli wars? And the Marines said to this lecturer, they said to them, they said, well, we study tactics of war. We don't study miracles.
Wow.
Because really, the wars of Israel is one miracle after another.
Wow.
And the fact that Israel could actually kick out these 5 nations from the land was a huge, huge miracle. Okay? So that's the first one, 1948, I already talked about before. Now, what was happening is the situation on the ground in Israel was very tense between Israel and its neighbors. At this time, between 1948 and 1967, by 1967, Israel had 2.5 million people, Jewish people, okay? 2.5 million, a very tiny little country. And the Muslim nations, first of all, did not accept the existence of Israel. Even though we won the war in 1948, they couldn't care less about the state of Israel. The second thing that happened, there was bombardment from the Golan Heights, where literally the heights, the mountains are very high. They were bombarding the Israeli settlements from 1967 to 1965 to 67. 2 years of bombardments. The Jewish people needed to live underground for 2 years.
Wow.
So that it was impossible. It was impossible in the north. We had also infiltration of terrorists from the West Bank. And I'm going to show you where the West Bank, here is the West Bank. So the terrorists were actually infiltrating from the West Bank into mainland Israel, and that was also very, very difficult. They were, from 1948 to 1967, every day or every 2 days, we had people being murdered and women being violated. These were the Jordanians, terrorists that were infiltrating into Israel and causing havoc. And they were destroying the holy sites in Jerusalem. The Jordanians had the policy of destroying all the synagogues and all the churches of Jerusalem and making that city completely Muslim. Okay, that's what they wanted to do.
Wow.
So we had all this going on. Egypt closes the Strait of Tiran, and I want to show you where the Strait of Tiran is. It's actually down in the south. It is also called the Strait of the Strait of Aqaba, or the Strait of Tiran, okay? Part of the Red Sea in the south, where Eilat is and where is Aqaba, okay?
Yeah.
So the Egyptians actually closed that, which is actually a violation of international law of navigation, because the Strait of Tiran is actually international waters. And what do the Egyptians do? They close the Strait of Tiran. Also, they started in 1967, they started amassing weapons and armaments, heavy armaments, on the border with Israel. The Arab countries in all directions, they're threatening Israel of imminent attack and annihilation of the state of Israel, okay? Israel at this time turns to the UN for assistance, and the UN couldn't care less and denied Israel of any assistance against these Arab nations. And the Arab nations believed that Israel was isolated from the world, and they said, this is the time to attack. Okay? So this was the situation on the ground before the Six-Day War actually break out. Okay? So what happens is, before the war, this is what we have in Israel. And Israel decides to attack first because of the situation that was atrocious, yeah? And in 6 days managed to get the Egyptians out of the Sinai to the other side of the Suez Canal, the Jordanians out of the West Bank, and push the Syrians out of the Golan Heights, okay? Because that's where they were actually bombarding Israel from. So they had to move them out of the Golan Heights in 6 days. And I'm going to share with you some of the miracles that actually happened during this time.
The 6-day wall, we know.
The 6-day war in 1967.
Yes.
Yes. So this is the new information that I'm going to give you. Israel decides to attack because the situation is unbearable, okay? The armies, the Egyptians and the Saudis are actually moving through the Sinai towards Israel. So the situation was imminent. The situation was not, Israel could not keep quiet anymore. Mm-hmm. Even though the United Nations said, don't attack them, we had no other choice.
No choice, okay? Yes.
So Israel decides to attack, and miracles after miracles after miracles with this attack that Israel makes at this time. Why? Because they send the whole of the Israeli Air Force to attack the Egyptian Air Force at 7:15 in the morning. Only 12 Israeli planes stay behind. The rest, which was, I think, about 150 Israeli planes,
wow, they
go towards Egypt. There has to be a stealth mission, because if the Egyptians can determine that the Israeli Air Force is actually going to us, they will open fire, yeah? So they had to do stealth. They had to go at 20 meters above the ground.
Wow.
They had to fly at 20 meters above the ground. And you can actually see the planes from that time that are flying 20 meters above the ground.
Wow.
Just the hair stands on his head when you do something like this, because this is very, very dangerous. Now, what happened at 7:15, and this is the first miracle. First of all, the Egyptians had the most advanced air defense system in the Middle East. But what happens, there were some leaders, generals of the Arab armies that were flying at that time, at 7:15 a.m., they were flying above the Sinai. Let me show you this in a map. These generals of the Arab armies were flying at this time, on the 5th of June, 7 in the morning, they started flying above Sinai to see the advance of the Arab forces towards Israel. And Israel decides to attack on that day.
Wow.
And because they were in the air, these generals, they said to the Egyptian forces down below, don't shoot at us, because we're going to be passing to see how the army is moving towards Israel. So these generals said to the ground, they said, don't shoot at us, don't shoot anybody for an hour. And that was the time when the Israeli planes are actually going towards Egypt.
Wow.
And they couldn't shoot them, even though they saw them. They couldn't shoot them. Can you see this?
Coincidence.
So that's a miracle, yeah? And Israel goes and attack an Air Force base of the Egyptians and destroy all the Egyptian planes, 200 of them. Now, what happens is that the surprise attack finished, because they were attacked by Israel. And then Israel sent another section of the Air Force towards Cairo in Egypt, to an Air Force base very close to Cairo, and then destroyed another 300 planes. And then another miracle is only one Israeli plane was shot down.
Wow.
They lost about 500. We lost one. Okay? Because of that period of time, in that hour, Israel actually made the attack. And we didn't know that in that hour, these generals were going to be in the air. Can you see this, Pastor? It's amazing.
Israel, the people, the Secret Service, the Mossad, nobody know. And this hour, this general is going to be supervising the troop.
Yes.
Wow.
So only God knew.
Yes.
Yeah?
Wow.
God knew.
Wow.
And this is what actually happened. And because Israel was managed to destroy all of the Air Force, the Egyptian Air Force, Israel had control of the air. Okay? Israel had complete control of the air.
Wow.
From that moment on. So they couldn't be another thing. Yeah, it was the hand of God that allowed Israel to be able to go through and destroy all of the Air Force. So we had complete control of the air. Now the commander-in-chief of the Air Force in Israel, who was called Moti Hod, he said, in my wildest dreams, this is actually a quotation of what he said, in my wildest dreams, I would have conceived such an incredible success. Because it was It was actually a suicide
Suicide
mission
mission, yes. Suicide mission.
in the eyes of Israel, yeah?
Mhm.
Because
Wow.
you don't know what's going to happen.
Wow.
And God so faithful. And another thing, we had old planes, Pastor. These planes were from France. So we got them secondhand.
Wow.
And we had complete control of the air. Now, the second group went and destroyed the ones that were close to Cairo, and you can see the planes on the ground that were destroyed. And the other miracle was actually Nasser. Nasser, the president of the Arab world, did not tell the Arab armies that were coming to attack Israel, did not tell them that they lost all their planes. They didn't say anything. They said, we are advancing towards Jerusalem. He was being arrogant, bombasting his victory over Israel on the radio, okay? And the Arab world actually believes Nasser and continues to advance against Israel when we actually have control, complete control of the air. And that means that we could actually pick them, literally,
Yeah.
okay, and get rid of them all. You see, 2.5 million people here in Israel, that was it. And the Arab nations are billions of them, Pastor. Yeah? And what happened in this is that Israel kicked them out, not just kicked them out, but they took over the territories, okay, to protect the land, yeah? So Israel took over the Golan Heights from the Syrians, and then he took the West Bank from the Jordanians, kicked the Jordanians out of the West Bank to the other side of the Jordan River. You have the Jordan River here, and they had to go to the other side. And then Israel took Gaza in 1967 and took the whole of the Sinai to the other side of the Suez Canal.
Wow.
So Israel was in total control of this war, and in 6 days, it kicked them all out. Now, what did Israel say to these Arab nations, to the Arab League? They said, make a peace treaty with us, and we will return all the land that we have taken. Did Israel steal the land from them? No. We said immediately to them, if you have a peace treaty with us, we will return everything to you. We have no intention. The only thing that Israel was doing was protecting its own people. Yeah? The Arab League, they went to Sudan in 1967, and they deliberated. They talked about what Israel was actually offering them, and arrogantly, really, they said to Israel, no. The famous 3 no's. No recognition of Israel.
No peace.
No negotiation, and no peace.
No peace.
3 no's, okay? Can you return the land to them if they are saying no to us?
Mm-mm.
Can we actually go back to the situation that we were in? Can we not defend our people? Can you see this? It's impossible. So if they don't want to make a peace treaty with us, we cannot return this land to them because they're going to attack us again. Yeah? That was the problem originally. Now, did Israel steal the land from these Arab nations? No. According to international law of warfare, And remember that the international law of warfare is there to protect the citizens of a country. And according to the international law of warfare, a nation has the right to take lands if that would prevent the attack on its citizens.
Yes.
And this is exactly what Israel did in 1967. And even though legally, according to international law, Israel have done the right thing, the United Nations accuse Israel, even to today, of stealing the land that doesn't belong to them. What choice do we have, Pastor? Do we have any choice here?
No.
Can we return this land to them?
No.
No. They do not sign a peace treaty with us. We have to defend our nation.
Yes.
Every nation has the right to defend its own people. If you cannot defend your own people, what's the purpose of being in the land? Yeah? And look at this. If it wasn't for God, Pastor, we would not be here.
No.
Yeah? If it wasn't for these miracles, we will not be here. Okay. Now, another war.
1973.
1973. This is actually the famous Yom Kippur War.
Yes.
What is Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. This is actually the most holy days in the calendar in a Jewish calendar.
Yes.
Where the whole of the nation is in the synagogue praying to God that God will forgive the sins of the people and the nation. So this is actually, and during that day, and the Muslims knew this exactly, during that day, the Jewish people do not phone each other, do not listen to the radio. Everybody is in the synagogue praying to God. And the Arab Muslim nations knew what was going to happen. Now, let me tell you, in 1967, another thing that the League of Nations actually said to Israel was this: one day we are going to get you.
Wow.
One day we're going to kick you into the sea. This is what the Arab nations said to us. And that day nearly came in the war of Yom Kippur, in the Day of Atonement. Why? Because 13 nations, 13 Arab nations, which is all the Arab nations that surround Israel, plus all the Arab nations that you have on the north of Africa, all of them came and attacked 13 nations. According to the research, the amount of weapons and the amount of people was 10 times more than what Israel had at this time. Let me give you an example. The Syrians had 1,700 tanks on the border here in the Golan Heights. 1,700 tanks. And we had 168 tanks protecting the Golan Heights.
Wow.
Just to give you the difference of what was happening here. The Arab forces are amassing at the border. Golda Meir is our prime minister at this time. Golda said to Moshe Dayan, who was the commander-in-chief of the Israeli armed forces, that had the patch on his eye, Golda said to Moshe, they're amassing at the border. We have to call the boys. We need to call the reserves. We need to get ready. They're going to attack us. And Moshe Dayan said to Golda, don't worry. Everything is okay. They're not going to attack us. You don't have to worry. Just, have easy fast. This is what Moshe said to Golda. But Golda knew in her heart that something was very wrong, and she didn't go away from her house. She just stayed at home. But she knew that something was afoot because of this amassing at the borders, huge amount of weapons. And sure enough, on the Day of Atonement, on the day of Yom Kippur, in 1973, which was October 1973, we have the Syrian forces at the head of these 13 nations. You have the Syrians in the north and the Egyptians in the south. And the Syrians in the north tried to get through the Golan Heights into mainland Israel. The battle is raging against the Israeli forces and the Syrian forces. And on that day, on the day of Yom Kippur, a commander of an Israeli tank unit have 12 tanks. A commander of an Israeli tank unit hears that Israel is being attacked. He's on his honeymoon outside of the country. He comes back into the country on that day. He goes and gets the soldiers that were all wounded in hospital. They signed themselves out of hospital, not because they're in good condition, but because they wanted to go and fight, even though they were wounded.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. And he takes 13 tanks, 8 of which he had to repair. And with 13 tanks, he goes and attacks the Syrian forces, that by this time they had about 600 to 700 tanks. Yeah, they went down from 1,700 to 600 to 700. Yeah, Israel managed to destroy 1,000 beforehand with more than 100 tanks. Yeah, but nevertheless, we still have these 600, 700 tanks attacking Israel. So he goes with 13 tanks.
Wow.
And the Syrian forces see these tanks coming and they start to retreat. And we don't know what's going on. They start to retreat and they retreat and they retreat, and they're heading towards Damascus in Syria. The Israeli tanks are actually chasing them, which is hilarious. And we don't know why they're retreating. Israel has only 13 tanks. And then they phone up Golda Meir, the Israeli tanks, they phone up Golda Meir and they say, Golda, what do we do? They're heading towards Damascus. And Golda says to them, just go back to the Golan Heights, and stay there. Protect the Golan Heights.
Wow.
To the 13 tanks. Decades later, about 20 years later, the Israelis go to the Syrians and they say, what happened to you? Why did you retreat it? And the Syrian tanks said, one, that they saw more tanks than what we had. They thought that we had a lot more tanks.
Wow.
And the second miracle is that they saw a light, a very strong light behind the Israeli tanks.
Jesus.
They were terrified of that light, and they went back.
Yeshua.
Amazing. Amazing.
Wow.
Pastor, this is only a few of the miracles. There was another guy, an Israeli soldier. He was the commander of a unit in the Golan Heights. And he had in his hand Yonah, how do you say, a bird actually was following him everywhere. You know, the bird that, una paloma, how do you say, a pigeon in English, had a pigeon in his hand. The pigeon would not leave the Israeli units.
Wow.
Probably he felt the presence of angels or the presence of God amongst the soldiers, and this bird would not quit.
Wow.
Was following them around. Can you imagine that? With all
You never can see, the paloma can be close to the people.
No, a pigeon would not be close to people. Not at all. But this pigeon felt safe with the Israelis.
Something I see to Sister Sonia, 1967 to 1973 is 6 years. And 6 years, these people come back to attack Israel.
Yes. So in 1973, they came all in together.
Yes.
They got ready for 6 years. And then on one day in 1973, on the Day of Atonement, they're coming from both sides. What they wanted to do was the Syrians to take the north of Israel and the Egyptians to take the south of Israel. They wanted to divide the country in two. That's what they wanted to do. Yeah? But they couldn't do it. Okay? They couldn't do it in the north and they couldn't do it in the south. Now, let me tell you what happened in the south. And this is absolutely amazing. The Egyptian forces advance more than the Syrians, okay? The Egyptian forces go in past the Suez Canal. Can you see the Suez Canal?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. The Egyptian forces pass the Suez Canal and they follow the coast up towards Tel Aviv, okay? They follow the coast up towards Tel Aviv. They advance for 2 days. You can imagine that thousands of people actually die in Israel during this Egyptian advance. And after 2 days of advancing, they thought that this was too easy and they stopped. They thought that Israel was going to ram them from behind. So let's stop, let's see what's going to happen. Yeah? And they stopped for 1 day. And that was enough to turn things over. Okay? Now they were winning. The Egyptians were advancing. Nobody could stop them. Yeah? And they stopped because of fear 22 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. If they would have advanced a few more hours, they would have gotten Tel Aviv, which is one of the biggest cities in Israel, which is amazing. And they stopped 22 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. And when they stopped, they built trenches for a day. Yeah, they built trenches that went underground. And the Israeli forces, the Air Force, was actually bombarding them from above, but they were not moving because they were underground. So what do you do if they're not moving? And the Israelis actually got beehives and throw the beehives into the trenches. And you can see the Egyptian soldiers running for their lives. Yes. They left the tank behind. They left the artillery behind. We actually use these weapons for subsequent wars that we had later on. And then we put them in a museum. And there is a museum here in the north of Jerusalem. There is a museum that is called in Latrun, that is actually with all these tanks that were left behind by the Egyptians. Okay,
I want to see that. I want to see that. I go to Israel.
It's amazing. And they left everything behind. They go into the jeeps and they started running, returning towards Egypt. Okay. Now, as the head of the Egyptian forces actually turned around, the whole of the army, the whole of the Egyptian forces actually followed.
Wow.
And the Israelis, at the head of this was Moshe Dayan. The Israelis started chasing them from Tel Aviv through the Sinai to the other side of the Suez Canal, and they went towards Cairo. Now, when they get on the outskirts of Cairo, the Israeli army surrounds the Egyptian forces, about 3,000 soldiers of them. And Moshe Dayan phones up Golda and says, Golda, let me kill them, let me kill them. He wanted to kill them all. And Golda Meir said to Moshe Dayan, you nuts? Are you going to kill 3,000 soldiers that are already given up?
Yeah.
Don't kill them. Let them go into Cairo. And you can actually see the footage of the time when the arms of the armed forces actually opens up and let the Egyptian forces to walk into Cairo barefooted. Yeah? When they actually ran out of the south of Tel Aviv, they ran without the shoes. They didn't have time to put the shoes on.
Wow.
And when they went through the desert, the shoes actually warm up the feet too much, so they had to go barefooted. Yeah? By the time to go to Cairo, they had no shoes on.
Wow.
Can you imagine that, Pastor?
Yes, it's a miracle. This
And
is powerful.
they went into Egypt. Now another miracle.
And Sister Sonia, after this, they never Egypt attack Israel, no? Never.
No, that's it. Egypt learned this lesson now. And in 1978, it was the first Arab country to make a peace treaty with Israel.
Yes.
And because they make a peace treaty with Israel, Israel returned the whole of the Sinai back to the Arabs. Okay? You see, Israel returns land if they make a peace treaty with us.
Yes.
We will not do otherwise. Yeah? Okay. Now, another miracle that happened in 1973, and this is actually recorded in all the book of history, that you can actually find. And it's also detailed in a documentary that is called Against All Odds. You can actually get it in Amazon. It used to be free in YouTube, but it's not anymore. So you can get it actually in Amazon. It's called Against All Odds. And in that documentary, Nixon, the President of the United States at the time of the Yom Kippur War, came to talk. And he said in this documentary that when he was a little boy, his mom said to him, one day you're going to be the President of the United States. But it's not because of you, it's because of the people of God, the Jews. And they're going to come to you to ask for help. And you better give it to them. That's what his mom said to him. And sure enough, during the Yom Kippur War, Golda Meir phones up Nixon. Oh, and his mom said another thing. She said to him, the people of God are going to have an existential threat. And they're going to come and ask you for help, and you better give it to them. Wow. I would love to meet up with this amazing mother. And sure enough, on the Yom Kippur War, Golda Meir phones up Nixon, gets him out of bed at 3 a.m, and Nixon said she sounded like my mother.
Wow.
Because really Golda sounded like a mother, yeah? And everything that Golda asked is everything that Golda got. This was the lift-off of armaments that the biggest that the world ever seen in the history of humanity. He sent tanks, he sent munitions, he sent planes, he sent weapons, every type of weapon that you can possibly think. Yeah? And it's amazing. Yeah? And this actually helped us to win that war. And another thing, remember that the United States was involved in the Vietnam War, yes. Okay, which lasted about 20 years. And in 1973, when Golda phones him up, he had already weapons prepared, packed to be sent to Vietnam. And instead of going to Vietnam, they came to Israel. By 1973, Nixon wanted to get the troops out of Vietnam. They had enough of that war, and they could not win that war. So he wanted to bring the soldiers back home. Yeah? And this actually gave him an excuse, even a further excuse to bring the boys home from the army, the United States Army. Yeah? Everything, the armaments went actually to Israel. And he fulfilled what he needed to do, the prophecy that his mother actually gave him. She's pretty amazing. Another miracle that happened in the Sinai, and this is amazing, and I think that would be it, okay? So we have another miracle, and what's this miracle? One soldier got lost in the Sinai. He couldn't find his unit. He got lost. And then he sees thousands of Egyptian soldiers in the Sinai. And they see this one soldier, Israeli soldier, and what do? They put their hands up.
Wow.
Thousands of them, they put their hands up to this one Israeli soldier. He didn't know what's going on. Why are they putting their hands up? Why don't they kill him? Wow. Yeah? But nevertheless, they put their hands up. So what did he do? He took them all to where the Israeli base was, and they were just with their hands up, and they sat on the floor, okay? And then these soldiers actually go to Egypt. And then the commander of the Egyptian forces in Egypt said to them, why did you give up? Why didn't you kill that soldier? What are you doing? And he says, the soldiers said that they saw angels with weapons in their hands with this Israeli soldier. They were terrified of the angels and put their hands up.
Wow, glory to God, glory
thousands
to
of angels,
Yeshua.
Thousands, yeah? And they said, we might be able to fight against the soldier, but we cannot fight angels, they said, to the armed forces, the Egyptian armed forces.
This on the war 1973?
1973, yes, sir.
Wow.
So Israel managed to kick all these nations that tried to attack us. Look, if God did not want Israel to be here,
glory to God,
we will not be here, Pastor.
No.
They would have kicked us out. Imagine 13 nations coming to attack the land. Yeah? This is miraculous. This is miraculous. Far more than what we can imagine. Yeah?
Yeah, you take me to the Old Testament. The day Hashem Adonai told to Moses, I want to fight your war.
Yes, yes, definitely. And this is only a few of the miracles.
Wow.
I can tell you another one. In the Sinai, when the Egyptian forces were retreating from the Sinai, let me get the map. And the Egyptian forces were retreating from the Sinai, and there was a road that the Egyptian forces were retreating in, okay? I don't know if it's that one or that one of them, okay? So there they are, the Egyptian forces are running away. The Israeli forces are chasing them. So what do the Egyptians do? They put mines on the road.
Yes, yes.
So that when the Israeli forces pass through, they blow up. Okay, that's what they did. And what happened was, during the nighttime, there was several jeeps and tanks, Israeli tanks, that were going through that road. And at nighttime, they see a massive fire on that road. And they said, we're not going to go through there because of this fire. Let's go and take the other road. And they went a different direction.
Wow.
One last ship at the end of this convoy of cars and jeeps and armed tanks and all that kind of stuff. Yeah? At the end of the convoy, there was a jeep that didn't see the whole lot of them going a different direction. And this jeep went straight on that road and it blew up. So look at this, Pastor. If it wasn't that they didn't see the fire on that road, they wouldn't go in a different direction.
Wow. Wow.
It's amazing. It's amazing, Pastor, the things that happen. And this is not just 1973. In every single war of Israel, we have amazing miracles that God is actually doing. Yeah? Why do the Arabs do not want Israel here? Because it is at the end of the times.
Yes.
The enemy doesn't want Israel to be here.
Yes, yes.
The enemy wants to get rid of Israel. If Israel is here, it means that the prophecies concerning the state of Israel are fulfilled. It means that Yeshua is coming back. And the enemy doesn't want this.
No.
Yeah? No. And here we see, and how God is actually protecting this nation, okay? And of course, you cannot steal a land that doesn't belong to you in the first place. Yeah, this land was going to be for the Jewish Palestine, but nevertheless, the Muslims said, no, we want it all for ourselves, and they wanted to take it by force. They could not do it. Yeah, Israel also bought the land that we already talked about in different lessons. Israel fought wars after wars against the Arab nations that attacked her. Had no other choice, they didn't have any other choice but to keep the land. Did we steal the land? No, we wanted to give it back to them. But they didn't want it. They wanted to continue the fight. Yeah? And what is Israel trying to do? Israel is trying to protect itself.
Yes.
To protect its people. Remember that this nation is a nation of refugees. A nation that actually survived the different persecutions around the world.
Yes.
That survived the Holocaust. Yeah? We're just trying to defend ourselves. That's all we're trying to do.
I think the whole nation is a miracle.
It is. It is, Pastor.
It's a miracle. Because,
it is a miracle.
You know, all these big nations have more money, have more army, big army.
Yeah.
People can understand why this little nation, 9 million people today. You talk today like 9 million people, around almost 300 million, 400 million people, and Arabian country,
nations.
the Arabian nation, got, this only 9 million people have the more powerful army, the more powerful soldier, the more powerful pilot. I think it's a miracle.
It is.
It's a miracle.
Definitely. Amen.
Sister Sonia, we have today this beautiful teacher. I want you bless Alma Rey. I want you bless me because yes, you're laughing. Every time you talk about Israel, only we can say thank God. Thank God for you. Thank God for you people. Thank God for the Israel, leader. Either today, thank God, because you said something. The devil no want Israel be there because this is the true witness. God is real. No nation have a real God, only Israel. We be blessed like Gentile to be serve God's salvation because Yeshua is Jewish.
Amen. Amen. Okay. I will play for you.
Yes.
Okay. אלוהי אברהם, אלוהי יצחק, אלוהי יעקב, אנו מודים לך שאתה
Yes.
נותן לנו את ההזדמנות לדבר על כל הניסים ונפלאות שאתה עושה בחיים שלנו במדינה הזאת. אני מודה לך שאתה נותן לי את ההזדמנות לעשות את זה, ואני מברכת את כל אלה ששמעו אותנו, ואני מברכת את אלמה רדיו ואת הפסטור צ'מפן וכל המשפחה שלו. אני מודה לך על כל מה שאתה עושה איתנו, בשם ישוע משיחנו. Amén, amén.
Amén, amén. Shalom, shalom. Y nos vemos el jueves. We see you
Amén.
el jueves de 11 a 12 del mediodía. God bless you, shalom. Y que pasen
Amén.
buen tiempo allá en Israel.
Amén, amén. Shalom, shalom.